The revival and expansion of Christianity in China in the 1980s was substantially a rural phenomenon for both Protestants and Catholics. That is, the rural growth rate was in percentage terms higher than the urban growth rate. Part of this pattern may have been due to the greater momentum of rural Christianity coming off the decade of the Cultural Revolution. It was also in the 1980s that some of the inherent similarities between Protestant radical millenarianism and the eschatological features of traditional Chinese popular religion became visible and interactive. It is important to understand the rural context and dynamics of this phenomenon. 1. The missionaries were long since gone. There remained very few informed voices capable of raising an alarm to the appearance of heterodox Christian doctrines. 2. Rural church congregations had been more thoroughly devastated than urban ones in the 1950s. In sum, for 3 decades, 1949 to 1979, China's rural sector was greatly exploited, inefficient, tied to a pre-modern, indeed many ways a medieval or feudal society, and was ready for change. Then in the 1980s, the decollectivization of agriculture was implemented as the most important part of Deng Xiaoping's reforms in the 1980s. Introducing the market into the rural economy was a great boon for farmers, making a real difference in rural incomes and prosperity for many. Rural society and life took a turn for the better. Farmers received higher prices for their crops, especially if they lived near a city. Independent entrepreneurs and light industry came to the countryside, and foreign investors as well. Rural income soared. There also came evangelists of the Christian gospel, speaking of concepts already familiar to many rural dwellers: the coming of the new millennial age, or the kingdom of heaven, and of a savior figure, like the Orthodox Buddhist Guanyin, or the less orthodox unborn mother, etc. All of these were already present on the Chinese sectarian scene, and all proved quite compatible with the veneration of another female figure, Mary, the mother of Jesus. Peasants were also accustomed to petitioning the divine for healing from sickness and disease, and to praying to multiple entities in the spirit world. Christianity was often considered for its efficaciousness, not its truth, for its connections with the supernatural, not as a statement of faith for an individual or a congregation. This is indicative of the competitiveness of Christianity with the other players in the religious arena. Another important characteristic of the Protestant growth in the countryside in the 1980s was that quasi-Pentecostalism became the style of a clear majority of rural churches. Classical Pentecostalism, and its Chinese version as well, usually includes the following as basic: belief in miracles, divine intervention in people's lives for physical and spiritual healing, and special direct communications with God the Father and Jesus, including speaking in tongues, dreams, and visions. All of these characteristics are substantially the same as Pentecostals in the West, but introducing them to urban churches in most urban settings very likely would have brought problems of the police authority's suspicion, RAB ire, and older believers' opposition to these practices. So these quasi-Pentecostal behaviors became very common in rural areas, then only somewhat later spread in the cities, in the 1990s and since.